Welcome to Dey Weekly. I'm your host, Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle. I will provide a quick recap from Week 11 of the Bengals game. And for all you fans, I always screw up on that, don't I? For all you fantasy football enthusiasts, I'll also cover the top 5 point leaders for this week. Now to Week 11 versus the Chargers. The Cincinnati Bengals faced the Los Angeles Chargers in a thrilling game on Sunday. That I was trying to be positive about that, but it wasn't very thrilling. The Chargers narrowly defeated the Bengals with a 34-27 victory. Now, here are some key moments from the game. Joe Burrow had another stellar performance, throwing for 356 yards and 3 touchdowns. He connected with Jamar Chase for 2 touchdowns and T. Higgins for 1. Justin Herbert led the Chargers to victory, passing for 297 yards and 2 touchdowns and rushing for 65 yards. The Bengals mounted an impressive comeback, erasing a 21-point deficit in the second half. They tied the game at 27-27 with less than 2 minutes remaining. J.K. Dobbins sealed the game for the Chargers with a 29-yard touchdown run with 18 seconds left. Evan McPherson just got paid and just missed 2 crucial field goal attempts in the fourth quarter, which could have been given the Bengals the lead. It was a heartbreaker for the Bengals, who fell to 4-7 on the season. The Chargers improved to 7-3. It showed great resilience in holding off the Bengals' comeback attempt. Now for Week 12, we are on a bye week, thank goodness. Maybe the Bengals will do something. I don't know, kind of like poking a stick at them and going do something already. Joe Burrow leading the league in passing and touchdowns, and Jamar Chase leading the league in all 3 categories, and we're still 4-7. Very disappointing. That's my little recap of the game. Now, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. You want to hear our reactions to the games? Check out the Roaring Reactions on YouTube, or listen to us on all your favorite podcast platforms weekly. On Wednesdays, you can also check out the Running Through the Jungle in our predictions and kind of go over of what we think are key to victories, and of course our game balls, what offensive game ball and defensive game balls we're going to hand out to specific players. Now to the fantasy football. Well, I'm sorry, I jumped to the gun a little bit. I actually need to take a quick commercial break, and I'll be right back with you. Welcome back to Running Through the Jungle, the Dey Weekly with your host, Tim Lyons. That's me. I'm running through the jungle. As you can see, running through, I can't point. There it is. Running through the jungle. Thank you guys for joining. And also thank you for listening on all your podcast platforms. Now to the fantasy football scoring leaders of the week. At quarterback, at number 1 was Jared Goff versus Jacksonville. He had 412 yards, 4 touchdowns, 21 rushing yards for 34.58 points. Joe Burrow versus the Los Angeles Chargers, 356 yards, 3 touchdowns, 28 rushing yards, and 29.04 points. And we still get the damn L. Now at number 3, Bo Nix, rookie coming in, versus Atlanta, had 307 passing yards, 4 touchdowns, 5 rushing yards for 28.78 points. Anthony Richardson versus the New York Jets had 272 yards passing, 1 touchdown. He ran for 32 yards and 2 touchdowns. He lost a fumble for 28.08 points. Matt Stafford versus New England had 295 yards, 4 touchdowns for 27.80 points. Now to the running backs, the Bell Cows. Former Joe Mixon. Congratulations, Joe Mixon. I'm happy for you that you are putting on a show in Houston. That's great for you, buddy. But versus Dallas, he had 109 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns. He had 22 receptions for 44 yards for 35.30 points. Saquon Barkley versus Washington not the Redskins, but the Commanders, had 146 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 receiving yards for 52 yards, for 33.80 points. Breece Hall actually was running the ball versus Indianapolis Colts, had 78 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 7 receptions for 43 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 31.10 points. David Montgomery for the Detroit Lions versus Jacksonville had 75 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 receptions for 20 yards for 24.50 points. And Josh Jacobs comes in at number 5 versus Chicago, had 76 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 4 receptions for 58 yards and had 23.40 points. And our own Chase Brown was at number 8 with 86 rushing yards and 5 receiving yards for 57 receiving yards at 19.30 points. I'm telling you guys this, if you don't have Chase Brown in your lineup, you guys got to be crazy. He's putting up points ever since Zach Moss got hurt, and I know he had a crucial fumble last week, but this week he held on to the football and he played good ball. Now to the wide receivers. Sun God Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Jacksonville had negative 4 yards rushing, but he had 11 receptions for 161 yards and 2 touchdowns for 38.70 points. Our own T. Higgins comes back off the injury list. I think it was his quad or hamstring, whatever it was, versus the Chargers. He had 9 receptions for 148 yards and 1 touchdown for 29.80 points. Cooper Kupp versus New England had 6 receptions, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 28.60 points. Our own Jamar Chase, the best wide receiver in the NFL right now, versus Los Angeles, had 7 receptions for 75 yards and 2 tutties for 26.50 points. At number 5, Jerry Jeudy versus New Orleans had 6 receptions, 142 yards and 1 touchdown for 26.20 points. Now to the tight ends, Taysom Hill. I guess Taysom Hill, the quarterback, the tight end, the running back, wherever you want to put him, the utility guy, versus Cleveland, had 18 passing yards and 1 interception. But he had 138 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. He had 8 receptions for 50 yards and lost a fumble for 41.52 points. Brock Bowers versus Miami, the rookie, had negative 3 yards rushing, but he also had 13 receptions for 126 yards and 1 touchdown for 31.30 points. Jonnu Smith versus Las Vegas had 6 receptions, 101 yards, and 2 touchdowns for 28.10 points. David Njoku versus New Orleans had 9 receptions for 81 yards and a 2-point conversion for 19.10 points. Zach Ertz versus Philadelphia. He had 6 receptions, 47 yards, 1 touchdown, and he had a 2-point conversion for 18.70 points. As you guys see, there's no Mike Gesicki on there because I don't even think he had a reception on Sunday versus the Chargers. The kickers, Chris Boswell, the point getter for the Pittsburgh Steelers versus Baltimore. He had 6 field goals, 3 for 50 plus yards. At least he knows how to make a field goal, unlike Evan McPherson. But anyways, he had 3 field goals for 50 plus yards for 24 points. Jake Bates for the Detroit Lions versus Jacksonville had 7 PATs and 1 field goal for 50 plus yards for 12 points. Cameron Dicker the kicker the Dicker, whatever you want to call him, versus Cincinnati. He had 4 PATs and 2 field goals, 1 for 50 plus yards for 12 points. Matt Gay versus the New York Jets had 1 PAT and 3 field goals, 1 for 50 plus yards for 12 points. And Jason Myers for Seattle versus San Francisco had 2 PATs and 2 50 plus yard field goals for 12 points. Now to the defense. The Houston Texans at number 1 versus Dallas had 5 sacks, had an interception, a fumble recovery, scored a defensive touchdown, only allowed 10 points for 19 points. Let's see here. Denver Broncos versus Atlanta had 4 sacks and 1 interception and only allowed 6 points, had 13 fantasy points. Minnesota Vikings versus Tennessee had 5 sacks, 1 interception, allowed 13 points for 11 fantasy points. Detroit Lions versus Jacksonville had 1 sack, 1 interception, only allowed 6 points, and had 10 fantasy points. At number 5, Pittsburgh shut down Baltimore, even though they still scored 16 points, but they had 2 sacks, 1 interception, 2 fumble recoveries, and had 9 fantasy points. Now to the I'm Perfect Excuse me. Now to the I'm Perfect fantasy football lineup. Now, if you were running this lineup, you were making people just mad at you. Jared Goff for Detroit had 34.58 points. Joe Mixon, congratulations, Joe Mixon, 35.3 points. Saquon Barkley, 33.8 points. St. Brown for Detroit had 38.7 points. T. Higgins at 29.8 points. Taysom Hill with 41.52 points at your tight end position. If you ran flex, Brock Bowers, 31.3 points. Boswell for the Pittsburgh Steelers had 24 points. And Texans defense had 19 points. That would have had 288 fantasy points. Unbelievable. That would be an unbelievable lineup. Now, knowing my luck, this would be my perfect lineup. This would be my I'm not perfect lineup with Kirk Cousins versus Atlanta, or for Atlanta, had 4.92 points. Tony Pollard only had 4.9 points. Nick Chubb only had 5 points. Oh my goodness. Deontay Johnson for the Ravens had 0 points. Ricky Pearsall had 0 points. Kraft had 0 points. McLaurin had 2 points. Hopkins, the kicker for the Browns, had 0 points, and the Falcons had -3 points. You probably got destroyed this week, and you probably didn't even make the playoffs, and you're probably never going to make the playoffs now. You had 13.82 points for the week, for the fantasy points week. Now, again, I just want to say thank you guys for watching, for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your friends on our YouTube channel on Running Through the Jungle, or check us out on your favorite podcast platforms. Again, my name is Tim Lyons from Running Through the Jungle. I appreciate you guys watching and listening. Have a great week. Hoo day.